Hi, this is Winter. Welcome back to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the story. All right, let's continue. Enjoy.
The story began with a young woman sitting outside a convenience store, complaining about her head aching as regret and frustration washed over her. The alcohol from earlier still lingered enough to make everything feel heavier, but deep down, she knew the real reason for her discomfort was not the drinks. She had slipped away from the club dinner because there was one man she desperately did not want to face, and the moment he showed up, all the unease she had been trying to avoid came crashing down on her. She had hoped the rumors were wrong, hoped he would not actually appear, but he did, and now she could not stop wondering why he kept doing this to her. As she sat there drowning in her thoughts, the sudden scrape of a chair being pulled startled her out of her haze. Before she could steady herself, that very man appeared in front of her. His presence alone was enough to shock her into silence, and for a brief moment, she could only stare as if her mind refused to catch up with reality. Of all places, of all moments, he had found her there. He immediately questioned why she was outside, and that only deepened her confusion. In her mind, disbelief flared up at once. She could not understand how he had ended up there so suddenly, and her first reaction was to assume that he had followed her. The situation felt too absurd to process calmly, and her stunned expression said more than words ever could. But instead of denying anything, he turned the confrontation in a completely different direction. He pressed her about why she kept avoiding him, catching her completely off guard. She instinctively tried to deny it, but before she could properly explain herself, he cut straight through her attempt and arrived at a conclusion so bold and ridiculous that it left her utterly speechless. In his mind, her constant avoidance had only one explanation. He decided that she must have been keeping her distance because she liked him and was simply too shy to face him directly. The confidence with which he came to that conclusion made the moment even more unbelievable. To him, it seemed obvious, as though there could be no other possible reason for her actions. That was the exact point where her mind practically exploded in shock. She could hardly believe what she had just heard. The sheer leap in logic was so outrageous that her thoughts spiraled into complete disbelief. She was not just surprised, she was internally screaming, unable to comprehend how he had managed to twist the entire situation into such a ridiculous misunderstanding. While he sat there convinced he had figured her out, she was left frozen in absolute confusion, mentally panicking over how anyone could possibly arrive at such a conclusion. What to him looked like shyness was, in her eyes, nothing but a massive misunderstanding, and the gap between those two perspectives turned the encounter into a chaotic and unforgettable moment. My name was Kim Yeon-hee, and for an entire year I had survived what felt like an endless cycle of exhaustion, waking up early every single day just to endure a brutal 1 hour and 30-minute commute to school. It was the kind of routine that slowly drained a person, and by the time her second year finally arrived, she had earned a small but meaningful victory. After all that time, she was finally given permission to live alone. Even that permission, however, did not come without limits. Her mother made it clear that living too close to the school was out of the question because the area was expensive, so Yeon-hee would have to settle for somewhere a little farther away. Even so, to Yeon-hee, it still felt like freedom. The thought of having her own place was enough to fill her with excitement. In her mind, she could already picture a better life ahead. Sleeping in a little longer, no more frantic rushes to avoid missing the last train, and most importantly, no more dragging herself through the crowded, miserable subway every morning. For the first time in a long while, it felt like the new semester might finally bring her something good. With that hopeful thought carrying her forward, she walked through the narrow alleyways on the way to her new place while talking to her friend on the phone. Her friend immediately congratulated her, but beneath that happiness was obvious frustration. She pointed out just how difficult it must have been for Yeon-hee to commute from so far away for an entire year and could not help but criticize the unfairness of her family. From her friend's perspective, it was impossible not to notice the imbalance. Yeon-hee had been forced to suffer through a long commute because her parents refused to let her move out, Yet her younger brother had been allowed to live on his own as soon as he started university. To make it worse, his place was conveniently located right near the school, while Yeon-hee had been pushed farther out under the excuse of saving money. Yeon-hee responded the way she always did, with quiet acceptance. She brushed it off and told her friend that this was simply how her family had always been. But inside, her thoughts revealed something much deeper than what she said aloud. This was not a new wound. It was something that had shaped her since childhood. Whenever there was something good, whether it was delicious food, something she wanted, or even simple consideration, her younger brother always came first. Her parents had always favored him, rooted in an old-fashioned mindset that placed sons above daughters. While that kind of thinking was disappearing in many families, hers had held on to it tightly. Growing up in that kind of household had changed her in ways she barely even questioned anymore. Little by little, she had gotten used to stepping aside. Yielding to her brother became second nature, and over time, that habit spread beyond her family. It became easier for her to give in to other people too, not because she truly wanted to, but because resistance felt more exhausting than surrender. In a quiet and almost heartbreaking way, she admitted to herself that giving up had become the more comfortable choice. Her friend, however, was nowhere near as calm about it. She burst out in frustration, unable to believe that this kind of son preference mentality still existed in modern times. To her, it was infuriating and unfair, and she clearly hated how casually Yeon-hee seemed to accept it. But Yeon-hee, as always, tried to smooth things over. She insisted that she was really fine, even if the truth beneath those words was far more complicated. Realizing they were running out of time, her friend finally dropped the subject with a sigh and reminded her to hurry up, unpack, and get ready so she would not end up being late. Yeon-hee agreed and told her she would see her soon, ending the call with a familiar warmth that briefly softened the heaviness in her heart. Then, a cat suddenly caught her attention. It was enough to instantly pull her out of her heavy thoughts. The little creature was sitting there just perfectly enough to awaken her playful side, and without hesitation, she took out her camera, eager to capture the moment. Her mood lifted almost immediately as she focused her lens and tried to get the cat's attention, silently encouraging it to look her way just in time for the perfect shot. For a brief second, it seemed like she might actually get it. But just as she prepared to press the shutter, the cat noticed her and abruptly jumped away, ruining the moment before she could capture it. Her excitement instantly turned into frustration as she realized she had missed the shot. Still, Yeon-hee was not ready to give up that easily. She adjusted the lens of her camera and quickly tried again, determined to catch the cat before it disappeared completely. But once more, her timing failed her. The cat moved just out of frame again, leaving her with nothing but another missed opportunity. All she could do was let out another small burst of frustration as the perfect photo slipped through her fingers for the second time. But something else caught her attention. Not far from where she stood with her camera still in hand, she noticed two men in the distance engaged in what looked like a very serious conversation. At first, she only glanced over casually, but the atmosphere between them was so strange and intense that it immediately made her pause. One of the men was clearly furious. His voice carried enough force to make even someone standing far away feel uneasy, and the way he demanded answers made it obvious that this was not a simple disagreement. The other man, in contrast, was bowing deeply, so deeply that it almost looked painful, offering repeated apologies as if his life depended on it. The imbalance between them was impossible to ignore. One radiated authority and danger, while the other looked like he was trying desperately to survive the encounter without making things worse. Then came the part that truly unsettled Yeon-hee. The angry man ordered him to make sure the so-called Viper Gang kids never caused trouble in the neighborhood again. The words hit her like a slap. Viper Gang? The phrase sounded so absurdly dangerous that for a second, she wondered if she had somehow wandered straight into the middle of a crime drama. Her mind instantly spiraled. The man being scolded was bowing at a full 90 degrees to someone who looked terrifying. and now there was talk of a gang causing trouble in the area. To Yeon-hee, there was only one conclusion that made sense in that moment. These people had to be gangsters. She was still trying to process the bizarre scene when everything suddenly got much worse. The terrifying man noticed her. The instant his voice called out in her direction, Yeon-hee froze. For a moment, she could not even believe he was speaking to her. Her reaction was pure confusion and fear, almost as if she hoped pretending not to understand would somehow save her. But there was no doubt. He had seen her, and now he was heading straight toward her. With every step he took, the panic in her chest only grew. He demanded to know what she was doing with the camera and immediately became suspicious, accusing her of taking pictures of him. Before she could even properly explain herself, he grabbed the lace of her camera with a rough, threatening force that made the situation instantly feel dangerous. Then his suspicion deepened further as he demanded to know whether someone named Kim Jun had sent her. At that point, Yeon-hee was completely lost. She had no idea who that was, no clue what kind of situation she had stumbled into, and no way of making sense of the accusations being thrown at her. But the man was not done. He went even further and demanded to know whether she was connected to the Viper gang too. That was the moment her fear truly peaked. Desperate to calm the situation before it spiraled any further, Yeon-hee quickly tried to explain herself. She insisted that she had absolutely no idea what he was talking about and that she had only been trying to take pictures of a cat. To prove she was telling the truth, she hurriedly offered to show him exactly what she had captured on her camera. It was the only defense she had, and she clung to it as her life depended on it, because in that moment, it honestly felt like it might. The man did not back off. Instead, he coldly demanded to see the evidence for himself, making it clear that if she were telling the truth, then perhaps her life would be spared a little longer. That single remark sent a fresh wave of terror through her. The word extended echoed in her mind in the most horrifying way possible. Who even said something like that casually? To Yeon-hee, it sounded less like a joke and more like a direct threat. Trying not to shake too visibly, she showed the proof. All she had to show for her efforts were failed cat photos, awkward, badly timed shots of a cat that had refused to stay still. Nothing was incriminating there, nothing related to the two men at all. She pointed that out as calmly as she could, practically pleading with reality itself to save her. As the scary man examined the camera, the other man leaned in and commented that she looked like nothing more than a normal civilian. It should have been reassuring, but it did very little to calm her. The terrifying man continued staring at her intensely, and the silence that followed felt unbearable. Yeon-hee could do nothing except stand there stiffly, too afraid to move, too afraid to speak, and too afraid to even breathe wrong. Then, at last, the man made a decision. Without another accusation, he simply told the other man it was time to leave. For a second, Yeon-hee could barely process it. They were leaving? Just like that? After all the fear, all the confusion, and all the threats, the two men turned and walked away, disappearing from the alley as suddenly as they had taken over it. The moment they were gone, the strength immediately drained from her body. Her knees gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the ground in overwhelming relief. The fear she had been forcing down finally crashed over her all at once, and in that moment, only one thought filled her mind with complete and absolute sincerity. She had survived. What had started as an ordinary walk with a camera and a missed cat photo had somehow turned into the most terrifying encounter of her life. One thing became painfully clear to her. She never, ever wanted to cross paths with someone that terrifying again. That evening, Yeon-hee met her friends at a restaurant, but what should have been a normal meal quickly turned into a tense conversation the moment Yeon-hee brought up what had happened earlier. The instant she mentioned the possibility of a gangster living in her neighborhood, Minji reacted so loudly that Yeon-hee immediately had to hush her. Even in a public place, the word itself felt dangerous enough to make Yeon-hee nervous all over again. Minji could hardly believe it, repeating the idea in disbelief, while Jun-lee looked just as skeptical, questioning whether something like that could even happen in this day and age. But Yeon-hee was completely certain of what she had experienced. She explained that the man had demanded to know who sent her and even accused her of being part of the Viper gang. To her, there was no way those were normal questions. If he were not some kind of gangster, then she genuinely could not imagine what else he could possibly be. Hearing that, Junli immediately became concerned and suggested that it might be too dangerous for her to walk home alone for a while. Yeon-hee quickly tried to brush it off, pointing out that their homes were in opposite directions anyway and telling him not to worry. But before he could even finish insisting, Minji jumped in and declared that they were absolutely walking her home at least for tonight. Yeon-hee tried once again to say it was unnecessary and that nothing was going to happen, but by then her friends had clearly already made up their minds. So the three of them ended up walking together through the alley leading to Yeon-hee's place. Minji, taking the role of overprotective bodyguard far too seriously, even carried a piece of wood in her hand, muttering that nothing happening was exactly how people ended up getting killed. Yeon-hee, embarrassed by the whole situation, awkwardly told her to put it down, while Junli added that they were more likely to get reported than protect anyone if she kept carrying it around like that. Grumbling in annoyance, Minji finally gave in. When they eventually arrived at Yeon-hee's building, the mood eased only slightly. Minji commented on how fortunate it was that the supposed gangster was nowhere in sight, while Junli observed that the neighborhood really did look kind of dangerous at night. Yeon-hee quietly agreed, already thinking that she would just have to make sure to come home earlier from now on. Standing in front of the building, she thanked both of them for walking her back and urged them to hurry home too, since it was already late. Minji reminded her to call immediately if anything happened, and after Yeon-hee reassured her and said goodbye, Minji told her to get inside quickly. Junli, on the other hand, simply looked at her for a quiet moment before finally turning to leave with Minji. Once they were gone, Yeon-hee started climbing the stairs alone, and the contrast between her earlier excitement and her current reality hit her all at once. She had once dreamed about living alone, imagining freedom, independence, and a fresh start. But now, whatever romance that dream had once held had completely disappeared. In its place was nothing but fear. The thought left her bitterly convinced that this had to be the worst day ever. Unfortunately, it was about to get worse. As she stood in front of her door, entering the lock code, a voice suddenly came from behind her, casually calling her the camera girl. The moment she turned around, her heart nearly stopped. It was him, the terrifying man from earlier, and somehow impossibly he lived right next door. In that instant, Yeon-hee's mind went blank. She had thought the day could not possibly get any worse, but reality had somehow found a way. The man looked at her with immediate suspicion and pointed out how strange it was that she lived right beside him. To him, that only made her seem even more suspicious, and he questioned again whether she really had not been sent by Kim Ji-hyuk. Panicking, Yeon-hee quickly tried to defend herself, insisting that she was truly just an innocent university student and begging him to believe her. She was visibly nervous, and the fear from earlier returned full force. The man, however, only dismissed her with a dry remark, saying that Kim Ji-hyuk would never send someone as clueless as her anyway. Then, in the middle of all that tension, his attention suddenly shifted. He noticed the keychain she had with her. Without hesitation, he reached for it, drawing Yeon-hee into fresh confusion. Looking at it more closely, he asked whether she happened to attend Hanguk University. Caught off guard, she hesitated but admitted that she did. That answer made him laugh. And then, with a chilling calmness, he declared that he was going to have to kill her. Yeon-hee froze on the spot, unable to tell whether he was joking or serious, though nothing about the atmosphere felt remotely playful. Her confusion and fear only deepened as he coldly warned her to forget everything she had heard and seen about him that day. He made it clear that if she spread rumors about him at school and caused problems for him there, he would truly kill her. At that moment, the meaning of everything finally sank in for Yeon-hee. They went to the same school. After delivering that warning, the man simply walked off, leaving her with one final reminder to remember it well: her next-door neighbor. And just like that, Yeon-hee was left standing frozen in front of her own apartment, overwhelmed by shock, fear, and disbelief. Out of all the possibilities she could have imagined, she never would have expected that the terrifying man she had run into that day was not only her next-door neighbor, but also someone who attended the very same university as her. The next day, Yeon-hee arrived at school looking completely drained, as if all the energy had been sucked out of her overnight. She walked across campus in a daze, weighed down by the nightmare of what had happened the night before. In the distance, Minji spotted her almost immediately, and the moment she caught up, she grabbed Yeon-hee by the shoulder and called out to her. When Yeon-hee slowly lifted her head, the sight of her was enough to startle Minji on the spot. She looked absolutely lifeless. It was hard to believe that someone who no longer had to endure the torture of rush-hour commuting could already look worse than before. Minji, alarmed by her zombie-like state, immediately jumped to the worst conclusion and asked if something had happened with the thug Yeon-hee had mentioned the day before. At that, Yeon-hee looked like she was on the verge of tears. Seeing that reaction, Minji instantly knew this was not going to be a small problem. She was completely thrown off, demanding to know what kind of disaster had happened this time. So Yeon-hee explained everything. She told her how the terrifying man from yesterday turned out to be living right next door, and on top of that, he also attended the same university. The absurdity of the situation was so extreme that once Minji heard the full story, she could barely process it. To her, it was beyond bad luck at this point. It felt cursed. She reacted with total disbelief, half joking that they should seriously consider some kind of exorcism because there was no way this level of misfortune made any sense. In her eyes, it was as if the entire world had suddenly decided to target Yeon-hee specifically. Yeon-hee, meanwhile, had already spiraled into full panic mode. Completely overwhelmed, she started throwing out desperate ideas about what to do next. First, she wondered if she should just go back to commuting again. But then, in the kind of unstable logic that only comes from pure stress, she took it one step further and suggested that since they went to the same school anyway, maybe she should just drop out entirely. That was enough to make Minji stop her immediately. Realizing Yeon-hee was clearly losing her grip, Minji tried to calm her down and force some reason back into the situation. She pointed out that if Yeon-hee had never once run into him at school before now, then they were probably in completely different departments. That alone meant the chances of them actually crossing paths regularly on campus were incredibly low. After all, they had both been attending the same university all this time without ever meeting once. So, from Minji's perspective, the best thing Yeon-hee could do was stop spiraling and just continue her life as usual. Her words were enough to make Yeon-hee pause. Thinking it through, Yeon-hee reluctantly admitted that Minji had a point. If they had never encountered each other at school until now, then maybe it really was unlikely that anything would suddenly change. Maybe it had all just been a horrible coincidence. Maybe as long as she acted normally, she could avoid getting involved with him altogether. That fragile hope was enough to keep her going. A few days passed, and then, just as she had finally started to believe things might be okay, it happened. Yeon-hee was in the middle of eating when something, or rather someone, made her freeze in complete shock. While they were in the room, another man suddenly entered, drawing everyone's attention. Standing in front of the door was the very same terrifying man she had been desperately hoping never to cross paths with again. The man with eyeglasses immediately questioned his presence, clearly wondering why he had come. The newcomer calmly stated that he was there to apply. Hearing that, the man with eyeglasses quickly understood the situation and welcomed him, explaining that he had come to join the Shutter Club. He then guided him further inside and told him to proceed with filling out. But while everyone else saw a new applicant, Yeon-hee could only stare in disbelief, her mind spiraling into panic. To her, this was impossible. There was no way this was just a coincidence. The first thought that struck her was far more terrifying, that maybe he had joined on purpose just to keep an eye on her. As the application process continued, the man with glasses casually asked what department he was from, mentioning that he did not think he had seen him before. The answer revealed that he was a first-year student in business administration. That alone caught everyone slightly off guard, and the senior jokingly asked whether he had retaken the entrance exam since he definitely did not look like a typical 20-year-old freshman. The man coldly confirmed that he was, in fact, 20, and the atmosphere immediately turned awkward enough for the senior to laugh it off and comment that he simply looked mature. But for Yeon-hee, that small exchange only made everything worse. In that moment, she finally understood why they had never crossed paths at school before. It was not because they had somehow miraculously missed each other all this time. It was because he had only been there for a week. He was a freshman. The senior with glasses then introduced the general club situation, explaining that he himself was a third year and that everyone else there was in their second year. One by one, the members began introducing themselves. A girl named Min Young greeted him first, followed by Kim Jun and then Kim Jun. Everything about the scene felt painfully normal to everyone except Yeon-hee, who could barely process the absurdity of what was happening. Min Young, however, was far more interested in him for completely different reasons. Leaning toward Yeon-hee, she quietly whispered her immediate opinion of the newcomer. To her, he had the exact kind of cold and aloof vibe she liked. On top of that, she clearly found him attractive, openly admiring how handsome and tall he was, and even commenting on how striking his name sounded. Yeon-hee, hearing all of this, could only scream internally. In her mind, she was practically begging Min Young to reconsider. No matter how much of a collector of questionable men she might be, this was absolutely not the one to set her sights on. Then, before the room could settle, someone else entered. The senior with glasses looked up and immediately brightened, saying the timing was perfect because a freshman had just joined the club. The newcomer reacted with casual curiosity, clearly interested in the fact that a first year had arrived. Kim Jun greeted him, and the man responded by remarking on how intense the freshman's eyes were. Min Young, as if completely unbothered by any of the danger Yeon-hee could sense, casually scolded the late arrival for not showing up earlier and immediately shifted the conversation toward the upcoming gathering, pressing him to make sure he actually attended this time. That naturally led to a discussion about the event itself, with the man asking whether the location for the gathering had already been decided. The senior explained that it had not been finalized yet and that he still needed to make the reservation. Then came the part that made Yeon-hee's heart sink. Since the freshman had officially joined the club that day, someone naturally brought up the question of whether he would also be attending the gathering. The moment Yeon-hee heard that, she practically stopped breathing. The senior with glasses, slightly flustered as if only just remembering, quickly confirmed that yes, the club gathering was happening soon, and freshmen were expected to participate too. Kim Jun remained silent, and Yeon-hee, listening to all of this unfold, could only stare in horror as a storm of emotions crashed through her. Panic, disbelief, frustration, and dread all mixed together at once. To everyone else, it was just a harmless club event. But in Yeon-hee's mind, there was only one thing that mattered. A thug had joined their club, and now, apparently, he was coming to the gathering too. In the corridor, Kim Jun walked ahead in silence, his pace steady and unreadable. A short distance behind him, Yeon-hee followed just as quietly, clearly hesitant but unable to let the moment pass without saying something. Eventually, Kim Jun noticed and turned around, confronting her directly, as if he had already sensed that she was trailing after him for a reason. Caught off guard, Yeon-hee was visibly startled, but after fumbling for a moment, she finally gathered herself enough to ask the question that had been bothering her the entire time: why he had joined their club. Instead of answering immediately, Kim Jun focused on something else entirely. He pointed out that she was older than him and questioned why she was speaking so formally. That only irritated Yeon-hee internally, because in her mind, the real issue was the exact opposite. If she were older, then why was he the one speaking so casually to her? Even while annoyed, she kept that thought to herself and pushed forward, repeating her question and asking again why he had joined. Kim Jun responded by questioning why she was so curious in the first place. So Yeon-hee finally admitted what had been bothering her. She cautiously explained that she had wondered whether he had joined the club just to keep an eye on her. If that was the case, she wanted to reassure him that he really did not need to go that far. From her perspective, there was no need for him to follow her all the way into a club just to make sure she would not spread rumors about him. Kim Jun's reaction was immediate and blunt. He dismissed her suspicion entirely and told her that she had a serious case of main character syndrome. In his eyes, the idea that he would join a club just because of her was ridiculous. He made it clear that photography had simply been a long-time hobby of his and that his decision had nothing to do with her. That answer only threw Yeon-hee off even more. In her mind, she could not help but be stunned by the sheer contradiction of it all. A thug with a hobby? And not just any hobby, but photography. The image simply did not fit with the terrifying person she had built up in her head. Kim Jun quickly noticed the strange look on her face and called her out on it. Flustered, Yeon-hee immediately tried to cover it up, awkwardly acknowledging that she understood and repeating the word hobby as if trying to force herself to accept it. But Kim Jun did not stop there. He casually added that from what he had seen the last time, he was already better at taking photos than she was, and that her pictures had been terrible. That hit Yeon-hee right where it hurt. She reacted outwardly with surprise, but inwardly she was already protesting furiously. In her mind, she wanted to defend herself immediately, insisting that the only reason the photos had turned out badly was that the cat kept moving and she had not been able to capture it properly. She even wanted to challenge him to show his own photos if he was going to talk like that. But despite all the things she desperately wanted to say, fear kept every one of them locked safely inside. Then, as if he had already won the exchange, Kim Jun turned around and added one final remark. He claimed that if she ever saw his photos, she would probably feel the difference in skill between them so strongly that she would end up quitting the club altogether. That was enough to leave Yeon-hee simmering in silent frustration. In her mind, she could only think about how unbelievably good he was at getting under people's skin. He knew exactly how to push her buttons, and once again, she had so many things she wanted to snap back with, but no courage to actually say them aloud. Instead, all she could do was stand there, confused and unsettled by the person in front of her. The more she interacted with him, the harder he became to understand. He carried himself like a thug, spoke like someone dangerous, and had already terrified her more than once. And yet he was also a university student, a freshman no less, and apparently someone whose long-time hobby was photography. None of it fit together cleanly, and the more she tried to make sense of him, the less she could figure him out. In the end, Yeon-hee was left with only one conclusion. She still had absolutely no idea what kind of person Kim Jun really was. Back in her apartment, Yeon-hee had just finished washing up and was finally starting to relax. After everything that had happened recently, the quiet of the room gave her just enough space to think more clearly. As she reflected on the past week, she tried to reassure herself that despite all her fears, nothing serious had actually happened yet. The more she thought about it, the more she started convincing herself that maybe things would be fine after all. Since Kim Jun was in the business department at their school, she figured he had to be smart too. And if all he wanted was for her to keep quiet about what she had seen, then maybe the best thing she could do was simply stay out of his way. If she minded her own business, perhaps she would never have to get involved with him again. For a brief moment, she even found herself softening her opinion of him, wondering if he might be more decent than she had originally thought. Somewhere in her mind, she even tried to recall that oddly fitting phrase about someone dangerous-looking but unexpectedly decent, a nice delinquent. But the moment that thought settled in, everything shattered. A sudden loud bang slammed against her door. Yeon-hee instantly froze. At first, she could only wonder who it could possibly be, but before she could even process it, the banging grew more aggressive, more violent, until it turned into full-blown pounding. Then an angry voice from the other side demanded that she open the door. Startled and frightened, Yeon-hee called out nervously, asking what was going on. She cautiously moved toward the door and peered through the peephole, only to find a drunk man standing outside. When she asked who he was, the man responded with drunken aggression, slurring out an answer that made it immediately clear he was not in his right mind. He shouted at her as if he belonged there, hurling insults and insisting she open the door. Panicking, Yeon-hee quickly tried to tell him that he had the wrong place and that this was not his house. But the drunk man only became more demanding, threateningly insisting that she open it immediately. At that point, fear completely took over. She did not know what to do, and then, without warning, an old memory came crashing back into her mind. A voice from her past echoed in her head, someone pounding on a door, shouting her name over and over, demanding that she open it. The memory struck her so suddenly and so vividly that it overlapped with the present, making the situation even more suffocating. Then the drunk man outside shouted again, demanding that she hurry up and open the door. Yeon-hee was visibly shaken now, struggling to breathe as panic tightened around her chest. She could barely think, barely move, and then suddenly another voice cut through the chaos. It was not the drunk man. A different man's voice, sharp and irritated, snapped from outside, complaining that he was being too loud. Yeon-hee froze again, but this time in confusion. Then the voice spoke again, this time directly confronting the drunk man, asking if he had rented the place or something. The moment Yeon-hee heard it clearly, recognition hit her. That voice was Kim Jun's. She quickly looked through the peephole again, and what she saw immediately shocked her. Outside, Kim Jun had the drunk man by the throat, choking him with enough force to make the situation instantly look dangerous. Yeon-hee's heart nearly stopped. At this rate, someone was really going to get killed. Without thinking any further, she rushed to open the door, desperately shouting for him to stop. But in her panic, the moment she swung the door open and tried to move forward, she lost her balance. Her foot slipped, and instead of making a dramatic rescue, she fell straight into Kim Jun, crashing awkwardly into his shoulder and body. The collision left the moment hanging in complete confusion. Kim Jun looked down at her in disbelief, clearly caught off guard by what had just happened, while Yeon-hee, overwhelmed by embarrassment and panic all at once, hurriedly apologized and explained that she had simply slipped. After recovering from the awkward impact, Kim Jun asked whether the drunk man was someone she knew. Still shaken, Yeon-hee quickly clarified that he was not exactly someone she knew, but she still begged Kim Jun to let him go for now. She pointed out that if he kept going like that, he was really going to kill the man. Instead, she urged him to let go and said they should just call the police. Kim Jun looked at the drunk man for a moment in silence before finally releasing him. Once he let go, he immediately lost interest in the whole situation and casually turned away, telling her to call the police or do whatever she wanted. Yeon-hee quickly thanked him, but Kim Jun immediately brushed it off, coldly explaining that he had only come outside because the noise was so loud he could not sleep. There was no dramatic heroism in the way he said it, just blunt irritation. After that, he simply went back into his apartment and shut the door behind him. Left standing there, Yeon-hee looked down at the drunk man sprawled on the floor and found herself caught in a new wave of uncertainty. On one hand, the drunk man had obviously been the one in the wrong, but on the other hand, Kim Jun had literally choked him. No matter how justified it might have felt in the moment, she could not help but wonder if that kind of action would put him at a legal disadvantage if things became complicated. Then the drunk man groaned from the floor, snapping her back to reality. Realizing she could not just stand there thinking about it, Yeon-hee turned around in a rush and remembered her phone. She hurried back inside, knowing she needed to report the situation immediately. As she called the police and began explaining that there was a drunk man outside their place, she gave the address and tried to stay composed. But even while doing that, another thought quietly lingered in the back of her mind. No matter what Kim Jun said, he had stepped in to help her. He was rough, frightening, and maybe a little too violent for comfort. But for the first time, Yeon-hee found herself wondering if he might actually be a better person than she had thought.
Hi, this is Winter. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Winter Manhwa for more exciting recaps every week. Your support means the world. See you in the next one.